I'm Austin Keller, and I'm Connor Redding, and we're here interviewing Olga Gonzalez on November 23rd, 2018 in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and our videographer is Elliot Rowe.
Hello, Ms. Gonzalez. So, where were you born first?
I was born in Brackettville, Texas.
Oh, okay. And where did you live most of your early life as a child?
I lived most of my life. I lived in San Antonio, Texas, till I was about 14, and then we moved to Milwaukee.
All right. What was your family like when you were a child? So, who was in your family?
My family was my mother and my stepdad, and then I have two sisters and one brother. My brother is deceased, and I still have my two sisters.
All right. What are some of your first memories from your life? Like anything you remember? Like what your earliest memories?
Mostly when I was little. Well, most of my memories from living in Texas is just being a lot of family time. We were a big extended family. My mother was one of 12 children, so I have a lot of uncles, aunts, cousins. So we spent a lot of family time together, visiting my grandma, hanging out in the summer. Used to spend summers by my grandma, and that's where I learned to speak Spanish because my stepdad, is Hungarian, so we couldn't speak a lot of Spanish with my dad because he wouldn't understand it, but spoke Spanish because we learned it when we spent the summers by my grandma. So that's pretty my good memories.
Did your grandma also live in San Antonio, or
I'm
where
sorry?
did your grandma live?
My grandma lived in Brackettville, so that's why we had to spend the summers. My mom would take us. My mom and stepdad would take us to stay with her for a few weeks during the summer in Brackett from San Antonio.
So you said that because your stepdad was Hungarian, you didn't have a lot of the Spanish traditions in your family. Did you have any of the Hungarian traditions then, did you have any traditions?
We pretty much had the Mexican, the Spanish traditions because my dad, my stepdad, I call him I will just refer to him as my dad because he's been my dad since I was a year old, so I just call him my dad. But he was the only one from his family in San Antonio. He was there as part of the military. That's how they met, because he was in the Army. And so he pretty much became part of the Spanish traditions. He slowly learned some of the Spanish words and, all the traditions that we have, for Christmas, making tamales and celebrations. He pretty much incorporated that into his what he liked to do.
So with the military, like, how was your father? My dad was from Detroit, Michigan, and he joined the service. So he was stationed in San Antonio. San Antonio is known for a lot of military bases being there. But I never knew that part of his life because I was just a baby. So by the time he was out of the service, I didn't know anything about that. I was too little. So I just know that he was in the service. Okay. So your neighbor in Houston, did it have a particular demographic? I'm assuming it was mostly Hispanic.
Yeah, in San Antonio, it's pretty much the neighborhoods that we lived in were Hispanic, so you felt right at home because, like, you know, that's why my dad incorporated all the Spanish traditions, because we're living in a basically heavy Hispanic population, and neighbors and the schools that we attended were pretty much Hispanic.
So do you remember having anyone who looked out for you in your neighborhood or kept you safe, or did you do that for other people?
Mostly we kind of took care of each other. I'm the oldest in the family, so I kind of watched over my little brothers and sister, my brother and my sisters. But I think we lived in a pretty rough neighborhood, so we always looked out for each other. And of course, you know, we made sure we didn't go into certain, you know, areas of the neighborhood, and we didn't stay out late at night. But it was still safe enough that during our Halloween, we were able to go out late at night by ourselves, trick-or-treating and knocking on different people's doors, and not be afraid that something bad was going to happen.
So despite that danger, was there still a sense of community and kind of like sense of like would you have parties or like news about if someone like had a baby in your neighborhood? Like, would you know about that? Or
yeah, it was pretty close, because we lived in a low-income housing, so we pretty much, I think people pretty much got along with each other, and we knew which neighbor was having a baby, who was getting married, who was having a quinceañera, what kind of parties were going on, and the same with family, because we had family around, and we did a lot of celebrations. So yeah, it was a very tight community. It was very warm and welcoming, and you felt safe and you felt happy.
So despite that sense of community, you were still kind of impoverished. Did you have any ways that you passed time, like any unique ways compared to like playing with toys or?
Yeah, we were really pretty poor. That's why we lived in low-income housing, and we did get food supplements, but we didn't have food stamps like you do today. We were used to go to government building. I don't remember where, but it was a government building, and we'd wait for hours, and we would get like a block of cheese, a box of powdered milk, a box of powdered eggs, you know, rice and beans. So that's pretty much what our diet consisted of, is a lot of government food supplements, and you call them commodities. So we're going to go get our commodities. So that's what you would surplus food that the government would give you. And my mom and dad had odd jobs, so the odd jobs kind of supplemented a little bit of other foods if we had a little bit of meat, but mostly, a lot of rice and beans.
So you mentioned earlier looking out for your siblings and them looking out for you. Kind of, how did being that older sibling affect your place in family? Did your mother and father talk to you about stuff differently, or did was it just the same as being a normal sibling?
No, I had a lot of responsibility, especially because if my mom and my dad were off to work, looking for work, I was responsible to take care of my younger siblings. I have to make sure they were safe and make sure that they got fed. And sometimes if they had to work like on a weekend, that would be a whole day that I would have to be taking care of them. So it was a lot of responsibility.
Do you have any stories from those times when you were babysitting, like that you remember?
Any what? I'm sorry.
Any like stories or memories from those babysitting experiences that you might remember?
Not really. Like I said, mostly I had to make sure. I'm usually the one that didn't participate in a lot of the playing because I had to make sure where they were and make sure that they didn't disappear out of my sight.
So, when you were young, were you was your family part of a church of any kind, or like what religion were you?
We've always been Catholic, brought up as Catholic, and my parents didn't go to church, but we were kind of fortunate that the apartment that we lived in, the apartment building across the street, was the elementary school. So, and that was from grades 1 to 6. We didn't have any kindergarten, so it was just 1 to 6. And then across the other way was our church. So we could come home from school and have lunch. And when my mom wasn't working, she would make us lunch, and then we would go back to school. Then after school, we spent a lot of time in church, Bible study, and playing. They would have like an after-school care. So a lot of the kids from school would just go over to the church and play on the playground and talk to the nuns. The nuns in those days wore a full habit, with the veil, with the head piece and full skirts. So, and then we'd play, and they'd have catechism, and then when the hours for that were done, then we'd go home, and then we'd go. Myself and my sisters would go to mass on Sunday.
Did you have any any memories about Bible study that you really remembered? Like any funny experiences or any solemn experiences where you remembered something?
Well, it was some really fun times because that's when we really got to play, and I got to play because I didn't have to be watching over my sisters. I could just play and talk to the nuns, and they were very friendly and very caring, and then they would give us a treat. So so that was always a good time to be over there. We kind of miss when there was a day that we couldn't go over there because it was just really fun to be there.
So you mentioned there was a school across the street that you went to. What was the name of the school?
It was Storm Elementary School. I don't remember the name of the church.
All right. And so you were in a very Hispanic neighborhood. Was there anyone there who wasn't Hispanic who might have looked down on you or bullied you?
No, I think that's why I liked being in that community because it's such a tight-knit Hispanic community that, like I said, you felt happy and you felt safe because you felt a part of the community. You weren't really any different than anybody else.
Was the fact that your school was in an impoverished area, like, how did that affect, like, your school time? Like, was there less school materials, or was there just, like, were the teachers not as nice, or how did it affect your schooling?
I actually remember the teachers being really, really nice and helpful. They were, they always looked out after us. I don't remember that there was any. Of course, you're little, so you're not really paying attention to what the school dynamics are as far as teachers and principals. But for our family, that's the only time that I had anything new. So we kind of look forward to school starting once the new year. The first day of school is because that's the only time that we got a new dress and new shoes. Otherwise, we couldn't afford to get a lot of clothes and to wear. So they were hand-me-downs or things that were used. So the first day of school always meant that we got something new. So that was kind of cool for us.
Did you have any other jobs? Like you mentioned the babysitting earlier, but was there anything that you did, any other things you did that might have helped you like make a little money or do something for your parents?
Yeah, no, not really. I don't think there were those types of opportunities when we were younger, and because again, like I said, I needed to be home. Taking care of the kids or helping my mom with the housework. That's pretty much where my focus was.
Was there any school activities or like clubs that you were associated with that you would do after school? Obviously, you mentioned the church and Bible study, but like might have been like a school band or something.
No, now we're still talking about being in San Antonio, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, that was pretty much being at home.
So, did you have any friends, or were you like popular, or who was your like best friends, if there were any?
Yeah, I was popular with what you would call the smart kids. I guess I would be a nerd at that time because I've always got good grades, so all my friends were the smarter kids in school, because we always were on the honor roll and we're always got good grades. So that's usually the group of friends that I had were other kids that were also had high grades and were on the honor roll.
So. With those, do you remember any specific people, or like how do you hang out with your friends after like school, or like
mostly we
associate?
Mostly we would just hang out when we got to school, before the bell rang, and then during recess or lunch, and we'd walk to school afterwards together. The school was about a mile from our house, so we had to walk there and back. So that's the time that we'd pretty much hang out together, just walking back and forth from school and during the school, but not into any particular activities, unless there was a school project that was going on that a couple of us would work on together, but then we did it, during school hours.
So, why did you want to make it on the honor roll? What made you want to be like super academic and focus so much on that?
I don't know. I always liked school, but I also, as I got older, that I saw how my parents were struggling and they didn't have any real education. My dad only went to 4th grade and my mom like the 3rd grade, and they were struggling a lot because they had lack of education. So that's really was my goal, is that I wanted to be educated and get a good job when I was done.
So like what? So you already mentioned walking home and like maybe doing a project with your friends. What other things did you do outside of school. So obviously in the morning you'd wake up, you'd go to school, you'd come home and maybe do some homework. What other things would you do with your day?
Just, like I said, a lot of the times my mom would just keep us in the house, so pretty much we would just play with, dolls and a lot of the stuff we would make, like our dolls, we would make like furniture for them out of cardboard, some old cardboard, and we make the dolls, and some of the toy stuff we would just construct ourselves out of old materials. And so pretty much we would stay inside. And a lot of the times the temperature is so hot in San Antonio that that we would be allowed just to play for a couple hours outside, and then we'd have to come inside and wait till later in the afternoon or early in the evening to go back out again, because it was just so hot out there. And my mom didn't want us to be stressed out from the heat.
So were you at Storm the whole time you were in San Antonio?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from first to sixth grade, and I graduated from there.
Where did you go after that?
I went to Harris Junior High, and I was there for 2 years, and then we moved to Milwaukee for ninth grade.
Was there a different environment between Harris Junior and Storm? Was it like farther away? Would there have been a different makeup of students?
There were the same makeup. Like I said, Storm was right across the street from us, so we could get up late, go across, go to school, come home for lunch, go back, and sometimes we would stay playing on the playground after school was over before we'd come home. Sometimes I forgot about that, sometimes we would go back into the school because the school grounds were open, so we'd go back later after dinner or something, and we'd play on the school equipment, the gym equipment in the playground. But when I went to Harris, it was a mile away. I'm not sure exactly if that's what it is, but it was quite a distance. I would say about a mile away, and so we walked there and back. And we had to cross a railroad track. I always remember that we had to cross a big railroad track and a big highway to get to the school. So we usually went with in a little group of the friends that I had made at Storm that graduated with me, and then we went to the same high school, junior high.
So at Harris, were there any hobbies or school activities that were there that you participated in, or?
No, I don't remember anything at Harris. Again, the same thing. I just remember that we'd hang out during lunchtime with our friends and, gossip about other kids and ourselves, what we were doing.
Speaking of those friends, were there any, do you remember any gay, did you have the same friends since you moved to Harris?
Some of them were the same, and some of them were new. My new friends, one of the new friends that I remember were two sisters. They weren't twins, but they looked like twins. They dressed exactly alike and wore the same hairstyle and everything. They dressed exactly alike, but like I said, they were smart. We were still hanging out with the kids that were in that nerdy group.
When you moved to Harris, was there any did you make any friends of a different ethnicity, or was there any students who were a different ethnicity than you? Because at Storm it seemed like they were mostly...
No, they were mostly Hispanic as well. So I think it's because, it's I think the community, the neighborhood was Hispanic, so most of the kids that were in the area was Hispanic.
So, how did you move to Milwaukee?
So my dad was looking for work because he couldn't find any work in San Antonio in Texas. So since he was from Michigan, we came here, but we came to Wisconsin instead of Michigan, and to look for work. So he came first to look for some work, and then he came back for us and brought us back up to Wisconsin when he found a job.
Do you remember anything about how your parents explained the move to you, or like how they told the family about it?
No, we knew that he didn't have a job, he didn't have good prospects, and we knew that money was tight and we couldn't afford a lot of stuff, and they were struggling. So, and we knew that he was from up north, Michigan, Wisconsin area. So they just explained he needed to go and look for work where he could find work, so that we would have money to buy, what we needed to buy. So, but it was very hard leaving all your friends, and we were making plans of where we were going when we graduated from 9th grade, which would be after the following year. So I kind of missed that, but you understood that you had to go where your parents went.
How did you personally react to the move? Were you happy or sad, or?
No, I was really sad. So, like I said, I was looking forward to going to the next school, the high school, and the same friends that I hung out with in junior high. Some of them were going to the same high school that I was planning to go on. So I missed that. I wouldn't be able to do that.
Did you move straight to Milwaukee, or did you did it take a while, or how did you get there?
Well, my dad waited for us to be done with the school year. So then we just packed up some stuff in the car and we came here. We didn't have very much. We didn't have any furniture or a lot of bedding or pots and pans and stuff. It was pretty much us all packed up in the car.
Were you able to keep in touch with any of your friends from San Antonio?
No.
Did you use any letters?
No, unfortunately.
So once you moved to Milwaukee, how did your neighborhood differ from the neighborhood in San Antonio with Storm Elementary and?
Well, the first neighborhood that we moved into was mostly white or Caucasian, whichever word you'd like to use, but it was mostly Caucasian. So we felt very estranged, uncomfortable, because the neighborhood was mostly Caucasian. They didn't look well on minorities of any kind, and we happened to be a minority.
Where did you move in?
We had moved over on around 29th and Clybourne.
Were you guys, so obviously from that mostly Caucasian neighborhood, what kind of discrimination did you experience?
Well, we were called a lot of names by the kids, a lot of derogatory names by the kids. And that hadn't been the first apartment that my dad had looked at. He had looked at a different apartment, and when he went to look for the apartment, the lady was very accommodating and excited for him to move in because he went to look at the apartment by himself. And like I said, he's Hungarian, so he's Caucasian. And she was glad to rent him the apartment. But when he went back, he told her that, you know, he was going to bring my mother to show her the apartment. When he went back with my mom, she told him right away that it had been rented already and she couldn't rent. So the apartment on Clybourne, where we moved in, he just went by himself and he signed the lease right away without taking my mom, or, you know, he made sure that we had the apartment secure, so, and then we moved in.
How did the culture differ from San Antonio? Like, obviously there was a different race than you. Like, were there any like slangs you might not have known, or stuff like other things like that?
Yeah, there were different terms, but you know, not anything. I think the only one that really stands out in my mind is the difference between a bubbler and a water fountain. So, you know, in Wisconsin, you know, we use bubbler all over the time, but I remember I asked somebody one time where a bubbler was, and they pointed me, and it was where the water fountain was, and they pointed to a big water fountain, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted a bubbler, a drinking fountain. But like I said, because of the racial tension, before my mother always kept us near to the house just because she was concerned for our safety. But now we really had to always be inside, and if we did go outside, we were only like out front in the porch or the sidewalk in front of the house.
Do you remember anything specifically about that apartment that you lived in? Like was it bigger than where you lived at in San Antonio? What was the decor like? And
Actually, the it was a lot smaller, and it wasn't as kept up. Actually, our apartment that we had in San Antonio, it was government housing, but they kept it up very well, and my mother kept it very clean. But it was a very big place, and it was nice and clean and painted, and you know, they did maintenance on it regularly. And this apartment was, again, my dad had to look for apartments that he could afford, so they were in. The apartment was a little bit more run down. It needed more maintenance, and it was very small. We only had one bedroom, so at the time there was just myself and my sister. So my sister and myself were in the bedroom, and my mom and my dad were in the living room. So it was quite different than what we were used to.
So where were your brother and other sister? Were they back in San Antonio?
No, they were born in Milwaukee.
Oh, okay.
So this is before they were born.
So then you were in 9th grade at this point. So where did you go to school in Milwaukee?
And when we lived there, I went to the 9th grade. I went to Wells Street Junior High, and I had to take the bus there, which was different. I was walking to school every day, and it was warm. And now I'm waiting for the bus, and it was freezing, so I hated the cold.
So, did you experience any bullying or discrimination at Wells Street Junior, or?
Yeah, but again, it was just mostly the name calling and not really being able to make friends. So I don't know. sometimes that has to do, I was also shy, so that might have contributed to it. But, you know, if you have people pointing at you and calling you names, that doesn't make it a very friendly environment.
Despite that, were you able to find any clubs or organizations that you were able to join or have interest in?
No, I didn't join anything, especially, you know, I couldn't stay after school because my parents, my dad only had an old car, and he was always at work or trying to find work, and my mom at the time was at home, so I would have to go by myself. So again, with I wouldn't be able to stay after school, especially, you know, when you have to change in times, and it would be too dark for me to be on the bus by myself going back and forth to school.
Because of the change in schools, did you take any less honor classes, or were you doing worse in school, or did you just still do better in school?
No, my grades stayed the same. Like I said, I always had that goal in my back of my head that I wanted to do. I wanted to have a good life later on when I was able to.
So overall, what were your thoughts on Milwaukee when you first moved here as a child?
When we first moved here, my sister and I, we both hated it, and we wanted to go back, and we cried, and we asked why couldn't we go back, and but of course, we need to be where your parents are, and you know, we still knew that they needed to have a place where they could find work.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of work, where did your mother and father work while you were in Milwaukee?
When my mom didn't work for a few years, she stayed at home, but when she did find work, she worked at a tannery, and she was lifting really heavy cow hides, which later on did contribute to her having a lot of problems with her back because they were very large pieces of hide and they were wet. So, and she had to swing them from one table to the other. So it was very hard for her. And then my dad finally found a job working for the Milwaukee Railroad.
So your mother working, how did that have an impact on the family, since now both your parents were working actively and doing very active jobs?
Well, it was good as far as, you know, having being able to do more things, having a little bit more money. We didn't have to wait for the first day of school to get a new dress. So, but we still had to watch our money. We still had to. I remember driving all the way from, taking the bus all the way from our house all the way to a store. I don't know, you're too young to remember. It was called Atlantic Mills. It's around where Big Lots is right now. But it was a really huge discount building, and we used to drive there. Take the bus there and go back home. So we had just a little bit more spending money. We had a little bit more food that, you know, we had a little bit more diversity in food. My dad, being Hungarian, he liked cooking. Once in a while, he would get out his Hungarian cookbook and make us Hungarian food, and which was a little bit nice to add to the rice and beans.
Did he teach you any other things about Hungarian culture? Were you introduced more to Hungarian culture as you moved to Milwaukee?
No, not really, but he did, like I said, he learned quite a few words in Spanish, being married to my mom and hanging out with my mother's side of the family, but he was too busy working. He would just work and come home, but he just taught me a couple of words in Hungarian, but I've since forgotten them because he really didn't, you know, speak it. It's just a few phrases that he taught me, but I don't remember them anymore.
Did any parts of your family move with you to Milwaukee? Like any relatives or
No,
family?
I think that was part of, missing being in Texas, that we lost that connection with aunts and uncles and cousins.
So did you live on 29th and Claybo your whole time in Milwaukee?
No, we only lived there a year for ninth grade.
So where did you move after that?
After that, we moved to, it was on Water Street. Can't remember where it was. I wrote it down somewhere, but I can't remember where it was. But it's somewhere close to down on Water Street and Jefferson. I'm not sure what exactly the coordinates are, but we moved there and we lived there for a year.
And then, why did you move there?
I don't know if remember why we moved. If we just needed to find a lower rent, or if the rent was increased. I just remember that we moved.
So obviously moving, you probably went to a different school. Where did you go for?
So there, then I went to Lincoln High School, and that's where I finished. So I stayed there for the rest.
Okay, so did you have any friends? Did you have any friends there that might have been different from Wells Street? Like, how was the experience at Lincoln? Was it any different from Wells Street, or was it just the same?
Well, the Lincoln High School was the majority of students at Lincoln High School were African American, and then Caucasian and Hispanics. So and the Hispanics were Puerto Rican and Mexican, which is different when you talk about Hispanics, because in Texas, the Hispanics that I spoke about earlier were all of Mexican descent. So now when we went to Lincoln, we had Puerto Rican and Mexican.
Did you have any jobs during high school? Because your family might have needed it, or if you wanted to get a bit of extra spending money?
No, I didn't. I wasn't able to work out of other than going to school. School was the main focus, and my mother was very good at, with that. She knew that I wanted to do better, and she wanted me to have a better life as well. So she was always on my corner as far as being able to go to school and stay there full time and not miss school. So she always supported me in that goal.
So you were still taking the honor classes and
Yes.
making honor roll.
Yeah.
So what were you part of any clubs or activities here at Lincoln? I mean, obviously so far you hadn't been, but you were in high school at the time, so you might have started diversifying a bit.
Yeah, there I went. I one of my classes was choir. That was that was a credit being in choir, but we also did a lot of musicals, and we did a spring follies, and so then I belonged to the business club, and I also joined the quill staff, and the quill is our yearbook.
So were there any particular choir memoirs from those experiences where you were doing after school activities like the musical or the choir?
Mostly those the activities that I did at Lincoln were usually we'd have meetings, and that during if I had they were kind of scheduled when we had a period, a free period. So, you have all your classes, and we usually had one period that was a free period. So we would go to, usually meet during there, and I made a few friends there, and the teachers were always very helpful and always encouraging us. So they had a good school staff.
Do you have any more specific stories from that?
As far as activities or what?
As far as activities, yes.
Well, like I said, we used to have I loved choir. It was a cappella choir, and it was. I thought it was a beautiful experience. We had for Christmas we did a program, and like I said, we did a follies, and then we would sing in the choir. We had our choir robes. I enjoyed wearing the big choir robes. So, and then our instructor for Quill, the yearbook, he was very, good with us. And I think, or like for Valentine's Day, we had where they would deliver carnations, or you could, or a song. You could have groups of students would get together and learn a song, a love song, and the other students could buy a carnation or donate for the whatever group they wanted to go to the classroom and present it to their girlfriend or boyfriend or somebody that they liked. So I tried out for one of those, and I'm basically shy, so but I signed up, and two other girls and myself, we were trying to sing a love song, so that somebody could come and donate, and we would go and sing in the classroom the song. But I don't think I think we practiced a few times, and then we gave up. I don't know why we gave up, but we never followed through with it. But that was kind of fun, just being able to get together with some kids and trying to do something.
Do you remember what the song was going to be, or any of the songs that you sang?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but it was one of Diana Ross's songs.
So with those whole Valentine things, did anyone do that for you?
No, I was always disappointed.
But with the choir and the yearbook, did any of those stay with you throughout your life? Like, did you enjoy choir? Like, did you try and find one at your local church, or were you just? Did it just stay? Was it just in high school that you did that kind of thing?
Most of them were just at high school. I tried. My voice has gotten scratchier as I've gotten older, so I don't. Although I'd like to try out for like a choir, I don't, because when I talk too much or I try to sing, my throat gets so dry that I have to start coughing. So I don't want to, disrupt the choir by having to cough.
Mm-hmm. What was it like to finally graduate, since you were like probably the first person in your family to?
Yeah, I was the first generation to graduate from high school, and it just felt really, really great, and then I was also the first one to be able to go to college. So that was a major accomplishment, and it just felt really good down to the bone.
When you moved to Milwaukee, was there any difference in your religious community? Like, did you you obviously went to a different church, or did you become a member of a church?
When we moved to Milwaukee, I went to Holy Trinity Church as when I lived with my parents, and after I got married, we went to St. Francis because that's where my husband goes, and that's where we got married, at St. Francis Catholic Church on the north side.
Were the churches here different from from the San Antonio churches? Like, how did they, and if so, how did they differ?
I don't remember, like when we came here, we didn't really go to church regularly. I miss not being able to go to, we don't call it, we didn't call it Bible class, we call it, it's catechism. We'd go to catechism and go to, on the summertime, we'd hang out in the church, the churchyard, playing, and the nuns were around. We didn't do that here, so I missed that, and then I think I remember, I don't know when the sisters started to lose their long garb, but I missed that. So I really liked having the nuns with the long garb and the head where just their faces would show. So so I missed all that from when I was in San Antonio.
So did you once you graduated from high school at Lincoln, where did you move anywhere? Did you move out on your own? Were you still living with your parents?
I lived with my parents after I graduated from high school for 3 years, and then we lived on First in Washington. When after high school, that's where we lived at First in Washington, and then when I got married after the 3 years, then we moved to the east side.
So you did move up. You said you moved on to college. Was that right after high school, or?
No, I didn't go to college until after I was married, and I had 2 children. When my children were old enough to be in school full time, then I returned to college and I graduated from there.
So while you were living with your parents on First in Washington, what were you doing? Like,
I was working. I was working. My first, because I had just graduated from high school, so my first job was in Hartford Insurance Company, and the apartment that we were living on First in Washington was, I think, one of the worst apartments that we had lived at. It was pretty run down, and the carpeting was old and worn, and it was mixed in with like an industrial area. There's some industry next to it. I think there were only like 3 houses on that block, and the rest was all industry. So my first job I used, and my parents were kind of behind on all their bills, their water bill and electric bill and stuff like that. So when I graduated, that was the first time that I was able to help pay back for, them taking care of me. So I helped them. My first few paychecks, I cleared up all their bills, brought them all to, cleared them all up so they were current. And
do you need a break? If you need a break, do you like to take one now?
Yeah, I could take a break now.
So, Ms. Gonzalez, we left off talking about your first job as a Hartford insurance typist. What did you do at Hartford Insurance?
We were typing 8 hours a day. So we were typing insurance policies, but they were for automobiles. So you had big sheets of inventory because you were insuring like a car dealership or a leasing agent, and you had to insure all the cars. So we had we had the make and model of the car, their vending, their VIN numbers, and there were multiple copies. So in those days we used carbon paper, so we had to make sure that you were fast, but that you were accurate, because if you made a mistake, then you had to correct every single carbon plus the original.
So around this time, as you had graduated high school and had your first job, were you thinking about marriage? Had you met anyone yet who you had romantic relations with?
Yeah, I was going out with my husband. We had he's 2.5 years younger than myself, so he was still at Lincoln High School. So that's why I was living with my mom and my dad, and he was still in school. So we actually got married at the end of the month when he graduated from high school.
When and where did you meet your husband?
So he was right at Lincoln High School. I was, I think I was a junior or senior, and I don't know if he was like freshman or sophomore. So like 2 years, 2.5, 2 to 3 years in between. So he was younger than me, grades, a couple grades lower than myself. But again, because you want to do better for yourself, have a better chance of making a better living, I wanted to graduate, and he wanted to make sure, we both wanted to make sure that he graduated as well. So we had talked about staying together and getting married, but we both wanted to make sure we both had our education.
So do you remember more specifically, like, when you met him? Like, did you just see him walking around school and playing with the computer?
No, he was a friend of my sister's boyfriend. So, and because my sister and I used to hang out together, because Lincoln was a junior and senior high school, she was at the same school that I was, and she's actually the same age as my husband. So he was friends with her boyfriend. So just hanging out with my sister and her boyfriend, then I got to meet my husband.
Do you have any memories from your relationship and your courting pre-marriage, like when he was in high school and you were typists? Like what were you guys doing together? If you have any specific stories.
He used to work. He got a job working at the gas station, like 2 blocks from where I lived. So so that's why he was able to come and see me more often, like after work. But we used to just, he had an older car, and he was a lot into mechanics, so he knew how to fix cars, so he made sure he had his car fixed. So he had an older car, and he would come and pick me up on the weekends, and we did a lot of driving around in the car, cruising. That is against the law right now, not to go cruising down Highway 100. But we used to do a lot of cruising. We just cruise up and down downtown on Wisconsin Avenue by the lake. They used to have a fantastic burger place by Bradford Beach, which isn't there anymore, but it was very delicious. So that's pretty much what we did, and we'd go to the movies.
Do you remember the name of that place?
I can't remember, but I know I've run into other people, and they say, "Oh yeah, there was a great burger place. They used to have really delicious butter burgers."
Do you remember anything about what the Lakeshore was like or what the geography of the city was like at the time? What were the cool places to hang out? Obviously, you were in a you might have been in a different neighborhood, or?
Well, because he lived on the north side and I lived on the south side. But like I said, pretty much when we went out places, it's pretty much just cruising and going down by the lake. They used to have that North Point restaurant that's there now. That wasn't there. It was, like I said, it was a different burger place. That's pretty much the only thing different besides all the memorials and other things that have gone up. The rentals for ski jets and all that stuff wasn't there. It was just pretty empty except for that burger place. And then the other stuff we did, he belonged to a band. He was the singer in a band, so he used to play at his church, some of the church functions whenever they had things going on after church parties and stuff, or they would just set up a teen night or something at church and they would play there, and I would go and watch him sing and watch his band play.
What was the name of the band, what kind of music did they play?
It's kind of weird because their band was Los Caballeros, which is a Hispanic name, but they used to not really play any Spanish music. They used to play more jazz and blues kind of stuff. They used to play a lot of James Brown, that type of music. So, but the kids really like it. When we had Follies at Lincoln High School, his band played, and he got a lot of girls liking him after that.
So you said he was from the north side. Was he a different upbringing, different ethnicity than you?
Yeah, he's Puerto Rican. So yeah, so his culture is a little bit different. They're similar, but not similar. We both speak Spanish, but there's different words that they have that Puerto Ricans use and Mexicans use, and that's part of the reason we didn't teach our children to speak Spanish, because we have disagreements as which word was the proper word to say in Spanish. So we just kind of gave up. He came here from Puerto Rico when he was little, and but he was used to more of the Milwaukee area than I was.
Do you remember anything about the Milwaukee riots during 1967?
We were living on Washington, and like I said, he used to work 2 blocks away at the gas station. So the riots were on, and they, the Mayor Meyer was at that time, and he declared, the governor declared martial law, and they had the National Guard, and we had curfew, so he had to come to work, and then go back home, and the buses were running slower and not as often, so he had to make sure that he got to work, and he came to see me, and then he got back home in time before the curfew was up. So that was always kind of scary, because I was always worried about him making it back in time. He would try to call me when he got home, and they didn't have a phone in their house. They had a payphone. There was a payphone at the corner where his house was, and he would call me from there that he made it home. And I know one time he was on the phone talking, and I think it was just about curfew or a little bit after curfew, and police stopped and talked to him, and he told them that he was just talking to his girlfriend, so he just told him to get back home. So that was okay, but it was scary just making sure that everybody was home safely after curfew.
So with your relationship, So, yeah, with your relationship, when did you guys get married? You mentioned it was at like a month after his senior year. When would that have been?
We got married in June 29th of 1968. So it was around, yeah, you know, there's so much going on at that time. You know, you had, you had the riots, you had, you know, with the curfew, you had the draft going on for Vietnam. We got married, but, you know, we weren't sure if he would get drafted or not. He did have to sign up for the draft, but you were given a number and you were called as you were needed until you got to your number. His number never came up, so he never served in the military or went to Vietnam, but that was always, you know, scary feeling to have, that you didn't know if he was going to go to Vietnam, because a lot of our friends did have to go into the service, and you know, it was just a scary thought that if you went to Vietnam, you were going to come back in a pine box. You weren't going to make it back home, so it was always scary time.
So, just quick on the draft thing. Was anyone you knew drafted? And did you have a certain stance on the draft movement?
Well, we had a few friends from that I went to school with that were drafted, and I know one of the friends that was drafted and did go to Vietnam died a few years after he came back because of Agent Orange. And we have a friend right now that is a Vietnam veteran and is suffering from the results of being, you know, in contact with Agent Orange. So that issue is really different than the draft. I really don't know if I have a really negative thing about the draft, because I am very much in love with America. You know, we need to fight our enemy, and we don't want to fight them on our shores. We have to fight them on their shores so they don't get here. So I believe in that. I think and it's either, if you need to draft because you don't have enough people, military to do that, then you need to draft. It's better to have the volunteers, but somehow we need those numbers. So I guess, although you don't like it, I'm really not that opposed to it. I'm opposed to people that dodged the draft, but I certainly understand why they did it. I mean, it's a horrible thing to be in a war and see all the atrocities that happen in a war zone. But yeah, I do believe we need to have a military. I strongly believe in our military.
So you mentioned your marriage earlier. Where did you get married?
We got married at St. Francis Catholic Church on 4th and Brown on the north side.
So after that, did you move in with your husband, or did he move in with how did that work?
Well, we moved in, well, he was living with his mother and I was living with his parents. I was living with my parents until we got married. So then we got married and we rented an apartment on Holton and Brady. It was up above a tavern, actually. So, and it's still there. And we lived there for a year, and from there we moved to 12th and Mitchell. And we lived there for about 4 or 5 years, and then we purchased our own home on Chase and Lincoln. And we lived there for another 4 or 5 years, and then we moved here, and we've been here ever since.
With those apartments, did you remember anything specific about them? Obviously, you remember the thing about it being above a tavern, but was there anything else? Were they better than the ones that you grew up in and lived in?
Oh, definitely. The one above, the one on Brady Street was really big and very clean. And of course, you know, now you're talking about a two-family income because we were both working. And of course, my husband wasn't making that much. He was an apprentice for Honeyschwager at that time, so he was only making like $2.45 an hour or so. But it was a two-family income. But so that was nice. The one on 12th and Mitchell was way smaller, but we could afford that better. And then of course our home we were able to save because we were then he finished his apprenticeship and then he became journeyman, so he was able to get full pay for that. But it was a lot better than one of the apartments that we lived in when I was little, the one with the house that we lived on Water Street. It was a coal furnace, so we had to, I remember having to come out on the coal, we lived up on the second floor because it was what people called the Polish flat at that time. So it's, so you would come the back entrance and go all the way down to the basement, and we'd have to shovel coal into the furnace so that we can have heat. So, and then go back upstairs. You run in and run out. You're trying to stay warm just to go shovel the coal in. So
during this time when you were living in 12th and Mitchell and Brady and Humboldt, where were you working at the time?
The one at on Brady, I was at Hartford, and the one on Mitchell Street, I was working a year after I worked at Hartford. I took the exam to work, the civil service exam to work at the courthouse and at the hospital. So I got a position at the old county. It was called the Milwaukee County General Hospital. That's not there anymore. That's where Freighter is now. So it was, but it took me like an hour and a half on the bus there, and an hour and a half back on the bus to get home.
For both Hartford, which you worked at during Brady and Humboldt, and then the General Hospital, was the work environment like? What was it looking like ethnically? Like, was it the same as your neighborhoods where it was mostly Caucasian?
Well, Hartford was mostly Caucasian, but there were a few Hispanics. Two of my friends from Hartford, one was a Caucasian girl and one was a Hispanic girl. So I had a good time there. We had, I made friends. And then when I went into civil service, that was a little bit different because that's when you had affirmative action and you had companies and especially government agencies were required to have a certain percentage or amount of minorities hired working in the environment. So because I was Hispanic, then if I ever got a promotion, I would get a lot of negative comments from other people, and mostly Caucasian people, that I was only getting the job because they were fulfilling their affirmative action numbers. So it was a little bit more hostile because of the affirmative action law.
So you mentioned taking that test to also be like a clerk. Where did that get you after the hospital as well?
I worked, the first job I had was at the county general, and then I took another exam. Civil service, you work in numbers, so you're clerk 1, clerk 2, and so on. So I took the next exams, and then I did get a promotion, and I went to work at the county courthouse. So I worked for the Court of Clerks and the Register of Deeds. So there in the Court of Clerks, I work with trying to locate delinquent fathers that hadn't paid child support. So then you get to see that where fathers are not paying their child support, and then I took another exam, and my last job was working for one of the judges, and I was his clerk, and I think I worked there 1 or 2 years, 2 years I think, and then I left, and that's when I went back to college.
While you were a clerk, did you have any observations about like crime in the city during that time, or like the legal system? You said you were a clerk of a judge for like 1 or 2 years. Did you have any observations, or did you just like keep your head down and try and do your job? Like, did you notice anything?
No. Well, when I was working for the non-support, there's a lot of non-support there, and there was a lot of negative comments there, because we even had one young woman that was working as a part-time girl, because I think that was part of her being able to get welfare assistance. And one of the comments that she made was that she wasn't going to be working because she was going to have children and be able to draw welfare assistance. And that's the way her mom did it. Her mom had a lot of kids and was getting a lot of child support, so that's what she was going to do, so that way she didn't have to work. So that was kind of that's kind of sad to hear, because it's just a young girl, and you'd want them to have more aspirations than that. And when I worked for the judge, we have to go between where the defendants were being held, to go back through that hallway. So then you're going through the hallway to a different office, and then coming back. So I was going through that hallway one time when one of the defendants stood up and kind of put his face in my face. So of course you have the deputies there, so they step in right away. And but that was kind of scary. But I mean, he didn't do anything to me, but just the fact that he stood up straight up and got into my face is pretty scary. And then you see, unfortunately, a lot of the cases that we saw were abuse, child abuse, relationships. So that was kind of sad, especially the child abuse cases. But the goal for our judge was to rehabilitate the parents and keep the children with the families.
What was the name of that judge that you worked with?
Judge Swarovski. I don't know how to spell it.
All right. So you mentioned moving on to college.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go to college, and for how long?
I went to UW Milwaukee, and I went to the School of Nursing. So I graduated in 1986 with a bachelor's in nursing.
Yeah. So why did you choose nursing as the thing that you would study?
I always wanted to be a nurse. I don't know why. I think I like helping people. Well, originally when I was a little girl living in San Antonio, I wanted to be just like the nuns. I wanted to be a nun, because they were so sweet and nice. But as I got older, I just felt like I wanted to help people and help them get better. So I always wanted to be a nurse. So I didn't have the opportunity to do it when right at high school, because my dad had to move us to San Antonio for like 5 months, and I wasn't able to accept the scholarship from Lincoln High School that I was going to be offered, because my dad moved us to San Antonio. But sadly, then for me, we came back right after school ended, so I wasn't able to accept that scholarship. So I missed out graduating from Lincoln High School by 4 months. So I had to graduate in San Antonio to finish off my senior year, and then we came right back. So so then my husband knew that I knew that because I had been going with him all that time. So he knew that that had happened. So he said, I know you want to do this. So he said, we can do it. You can go to school. So with my husband's support, then I was able to go back to school. And I was a nurse until I retired in 2013.
Oh, okay. So what made you decide to go to college when you did? Like, when you were a clerk, it seemed like you were doing pretty okay for yourself. Why you wanted to help people, but why didn't you do it when you were a Hartford typist or something like that?
Yeah, it was a pretty good job working for Milwaukee County. Again, there was a lot of negative stuff going on, like I said, with the affirmative action, and people I always felt like they were down on me because I was Hispanic, and I was minority filling in their quotas, and they didn't seem to be very helpful as far as trying to help me learn a new job. When I went into a new job, they weren't willing to share their experience. So I felt, and I wanted to do a good job. So I felt if I wanted to do a good job and really do what I loved, if I went back to school and got an education, I would learn the skills to be able to do the job well and do something that I liked.
So do you have any memories of college and what it was like going to classes? And maybe because you were an older woman, were there any differences?
Well, I always try to schedule my classes around the time that my kids were in school, so that I could be home when they were getting back home. So I'd make sure that they got to school and that I was back home. So I had my classes always scheduled around those times. A couple of times I did get home late, and they were waiting for me out on the porch. So, but that wasn't very often. And being older, yeah, you do feel a little self-conscious because everybody is very young, and I think I think they're more up to date on the current events and things that are happening there. Because they're just graduating out of high school, or they had the opportunity to have a nurse-related job, like nursing assistant or something, that already added to their education, where I was just coming straight from home and haven't used any study skills. So I had to make sure that I really followed through on my study skills in between trying to take care of the kids and taking care of the home, and then doing studying. So I had to make sure that they were fed and given a bath and did their homework, and then my homework came after they were all in bed, so that was quite late at night.
And around this time, you had already been to, you'd already moved in at Lincoln and Chase, and now we're living in Oak Creek, or were you at Lincoln and Chase?
Right, I didn't start college until we moved to Oak Creek.
Okay. So when was your daughter born? You mentioned having daughters.
She was born in 1974, and my son was born in 1977. So we moved here. We moved here when he was a year old, and one of the reasons that we did move at that time was because my daughter was going to start kindergarten, and even though the school was right across the street from our house, she was going to be bused to the north side. And not that I had anything about that, but because I was working, I didn't know how to manage that as far as her getting her to school and making sure that if she needed me or whatever, that I'd be available to go drive all the way to the north side to go pick her up. And one of the reasons that we moved to that house was because the school was right across the street, so we figured that's where she would go. But again, because they were trying to, at that time, make sure that there were an equal number of, I don't know if desegregation kind of stuff, that they wanted to make sure that there were more, trying to even out the population on the north side school, so that the north side had a population of whites and Hispanics.
So once you graduated from college, where did you work?
Well, when I graduated from college, I got my first job was at Oak Creek Health Department as a public health nurse, and I hadn't thought of public health nurse work. But when I went there, when you graduate from the nursing program, you have to have a TB skin test to make sure you're okay before you start a job. And the clinic on campus was going to be closed when my skin test needed to be read, so they told me to go to the health department. And when I went to go there to have it read, they saw that I needed it for nursing school, so they had a job opening, and they asked me if I had ever considered a job in public health, and that they needed a nurse who could speak Spanish because they had a population in the community of Hispanic families.
So, as a public health nurse, where did you work in the Milwaukee and Milwaukee suburbs?
I worked at Oak Creek, then I worked at Greendale, and Oak Creek, and then I went to South Milwaukee Health Department, and then I retired from the Greendale Health Department.
Was the work environment here again, you were working for the local government, so was it the same as the county clerk and such, or was it different?
It was different because I think being smaller communities, they are, I think they were, just wanted to make sure, they're always concerned about their budgets. So as far as they're keeping their budgets in line with what they're paying their employees, it's pretty much up to the nursing directors to employ who they feel is qualified for the job.
So you worked there from till 2013, and you started when did you start working at the public health department?
In 1986, when I graduated from college.
Okay. Do you have any stories from those work environments?
Well, those were nice. I worked with babies, doing home visits, for newborns and the elderly, being a school nurse at the different levels, the elementaries, the high school, parochial schools, doing screenings and just doing like health fairs for the health department, and you know, those kinds of things that and all my supervisors were always very and supportive, and always, you know, they were more concerned with, you know, the health of the community, so they were always supported of their employees.
At this time, you were living and working in Oak Creek. How did that differ from working in the city compared to working in a suburb and living in a suburb?
Well, that was more a little bit friendlier. The only two there's only two incidences that kind of stick in my head, and again, it goes to my culture. Is when we first moved in here in let's see, in 1977, our neighbors, when they saw that that we moved in, and they're Caucasian, and I think that because they saw that we were Hispanic, they were standing outside on their yard watching us move in, and I don't know if it was the husband or the wife said, well, there goes the value of the neighborhood. So that's because you know, that's a slur. They moved out, so now all the neighbors that we've had have been wonderful. I mean, we're very close to all our neighbors. We, you know, help each other out. We go to their homes. You know, our kids played with their kids, but that neighbor that lived there was very negative, very prejudiced. So it was hard, you know, being the neighbor there. And then the only other one, when I worked in South Milwaukee, one of my co-workers, because she knew I was Hispanic, would always call me, whenever she would address me as señorita. And whenever she would give me gifts, they were always Hispanic related. She'd give me, like she gave me a set of pot holders with chilies on them. And she gave me a couple other gifts, and they all had chili peppers or something Hispanic related. But she would always, or she'd say I was taking a siesta or something. And she thought she was being funny, but you know, after a while, it just doesn't sit right. So, but I told her one time that I felt uncomfortable with her always doing that, and she stopped. So, and then she just talked to me just like another co-worker. So those were the only really couple of things that kind of stood out about here. But everything's really looked up.
All right, wrapping up here. What made you stay in Milwaukee for pretty much your whole adult life? Like, despite having a lot of hardships in the city, eventually you did move to Oak Creek, and it seems like that was a much better community. But what made you stay in Milwaukee?
Well, like I said, that's what you could afford. You know, I think a lot of people that live in Milwaukee is because it's a little bit more affordable than subdivisions. So, you know, the rents are a little cheaper, and transportation, because didn't have a car, so you can't get to work or anywhere without public transit. So it's more economics. And after we were able to, you know, get our education set and have a better income, then we were able to afford to buy a home and move out to a little, you know, what I consider a nicer home than we used to have, or a nicer apartment, at least have a home instead of an apartment. And although we did have a lot of hardships in the neighborhood because our children were kind of bullied because of their ethnicity as well when they were in school. Even though I thought they wouldn't be, maybe they wouldn't be because they started here from the very beginning and they stayed here through the whole time. They were still kind of bullied and made fun of. But I think, like I said, a neighbor moved out, things got better, and our children succeeded in spite of it. So things are just doing really well. I think things have changed and gotten better, but there's still a ways to go.
More specifically, why Milwaukee? Why not move back to San Antonio? Why not move to somewhere else? What made you stay in the Milwaukee area? Like, why did you choose Milwaukee?
We stayed here because from seeing what my relatives are going through, there's still, the family that we left behind, there's still, a lot of them are still living in poverty. A lot of things haven't changed for them. There's still a lack of employment opportunities. And I think most of my cousins work in retail, and which isn't, I'm not say that's negative, but I mean they're just doing very entry minimum wage, and they're struggling. They're having problems, supporting themselves and having work. So. And then we've made friends with our neighbors, and like I said, things have gotten better with our jobs and people that we know, so we grew to love it here. So I hated to leave San Antonio, but now I would hate to leave Wisconsin.
So, final question, what is your opinion of Milwaukee now?
It's sad to hear all the troubles in the school system. All the fights and disagreements that kids have. They don't feel safe, and I say that because of my grandson when he was going to school. The schools were in a lot of chaos, and I have a couple of friends that are teachers in some of the schools, and they're also have a lot of concerns of how the school system is run. So I think there's a lot of jobs out there. I mean, everywhere you go, there's for hire signs. So I think the economy has gotten better, but I just still think that there needs to be some change as far as violence, whether it's in school or in the streets.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I just hope it's helpful. I do enjoy living in the area, and I think it's a good place to have a family. I think changes need to be made, but I think they need to be made elsewhere as well, even if it would be in my hometown of San Antonio.
Thank you.
You're welcome.